Hey everybody, how's it going? Mike here from the Focus Garage, and even though this is going to be a video about C6 Corvettes, we are in the Mark 7 GTI because it is winter in Illinois and it is cold out, and that car is probably stored for the winter unless we get some pretty nice days. So in this video, I'm going to be talking to you guys about what separates a C6 Z06 from a C6 Grand Sport. We've gotten messages on our Facebook, on our Instagram, and in the comments and YouTube videos about, did I consider the Z06? Why did I pick a Grand Sport? Why didn't I pick a Z06? And I want to take a few minutes in this video to kind of touch on some of the facts of what separates those cars from one another, where they're different, where you might want to choose one car over the other car, and just touch on both of those cars in general in the C6 Corvette generation. Starting off here, I kind of like to do everything in a chronological order, so we're going to do kind of a timeline here. Some of the biggest things that set the Z06 apart from the Grand Sport are the years in which they are made. The C6 Z06 was made almost from the beginning of the C6 Corvette in 2006 all the way to the end of the generation in 2013, whereas the Grand Sport was made only from 2010 till 2013. So if you're looking at a Grand Sport versus Z06, you will be getting a Corvette that's newer a lot of the time when you choose a Grand Sport, but because of that, the prices will be more expensive because you're buying a newer car. Now, over time with the Corvette in the C6 generation, there have been little things that change with the interior and the differential and the transmission, so this isn't too much of a technical video. I won't get too much into that, but that's just something to consider when you're looking at, like a 2006 Z06 versus a 2012 Grand Sport. There's going to be a little, differences there just in what's changed through the years in the C6 Corvette. So years are different. Obviously, the C6 Z06 was made for longer. The other biggest difference between them, at least in my personal opinion, because of chassis rigidity and the fact that GM wanted to make the Z06 more of a track car, a race car, you're going to come into the fact that none of the Z06s in the C6 generation have a removable roof. On C7 Corvettes, you can buy an automatic Z06, you can buy a convertible one, you can buy them with a removable roof, but in the C6 generation, all Z06s have manual transmission and fixed roofs. None of the roofs are removable, they're all manuals. When you're looking at the Grand Sports, you can find them as a convertible, you can find them as a coupe with a removable roof, you can find them with a manual transmission, and you can find them as automatics. So if you're looking for something that isn't as hardcore and taking the roof off is important to you, we'll be looking at a Grand Sport right off the bat because you cannot get a removable roof Z06. The other thing with that too is if you get a manual Grand Sport coupe, they do come with the same dry sump oiling system that comes in the Z06 and that comes in the Z01, so that's kind of your middle ground there. So no removable roof on the Z06. All the Z06s are going to have manual transmissions. That's another thing to look out for there. Now, because of that fixed roof scenario and more of that race car scenario of the Z06, there's some other things you're going to be finding with that. It's going to have stiffer suspension, so the shocks are differently tuned. I believe it's going to have stiffer sway bars as well, and some of the biggest weight savings is going to be the frame is made out of aluminum, and then the engine cradle is made out of magnesium. These are going to be some weight savings tactics that you're not going to be finding in a Grand Sport that kind of put that Z06 150, 200 pounds lighter, and that make it a little bit more nimble, a little bit more of a track car. There is that aluminum frame and magnesium engine cradle. Now, keep in mind, for the aluminum frame is a little more temperamental to lifting the car, so you got to be more careful with that. If you get in an accident and you damage that magnesium subframe, it's going to be much more expensive to replace than a standard subframe that you'd find in a standard, base model or Grand Sport C6 Corvette. Now, another thing is the fenders. Now, both of the cars are wide body, so the Grand Sport and the Z06 both have wide body front and rear fenders and a specific front bumper, but the front fenders on the Z06 are carbon fiber, whereas the front wide body fenders on the Grand Sport are fiberglass. This is really easy to tell because if you tap your knuckles or your fingernails to the back of the fenders one after another, you can hear the difference in noise that these cars make. So the Z06 has, kind of that, again, more weight loss criteria to it. It's going to have those carbon fiber front fenders there, which again shave some pounds versus the standard fiberglass fenders on a Grand Sport. Both cars do share the same brake calipers, rotors, and pads, but if you get a later model Z06 with the Z07 package, those cars will have carbon ceramic brakes shared with the ZR1, and they'll have a carbon fiber roof versus the standard fixed roof of the Z06. So if you're getting more fancy Z06 here, you're going to get more carbon fiber. You're also going to get a carbon fiber front lip versus the standard plastic front lip, which is shared with a Grand Sport. So That's another thing there as well. You can option the Z06 to have even more standalone parts that would set it apart from your standard C6 Grand Sport. Now, one of the biggest things that I'd be remiss to not touch on here is the powertrain. If you get a Grand Sport, you're getting an LS3. That's it. No way around that. If you get a Z06, you are getting an LS7. Now, the difference with that is that the Grand Sport has a 6.2 liter V8, making anywhere from 430 to 436 crank horsepower. That's your LS3. And the Z06 gets the LS7, which is a 7 liter small block Chevy V8 that makes 505 horsepower, revs to 7,000 RPM, has dry sump oiling, and is just an absolute beast of a motor. Now, as much as I love the LS7, there's one critical flaw with it, which made the decision for me picking a Grand Sport that much easier. The Z06 is known to have valve problems where the valve seats aren't machined properly on the stock cylinder heads, which can basically over wear and tear, and there's no set mileage to this. This can happen on low 20,000 mile cars, or you go 120,000 miles and never have an issue. But what'll happen is the valve seats wear out where your car can actually drop the valve and destroy your motor. So the valve will drop into the cylinder, meet the piston, and you're essentially totaling a $15,000 to $18,000 engine. Now the problem with that is that there is a fix where you can put aftermarket cylinder heads on the car, but I've heard that even some of these people with cylinder heads that are fixed still have issues of cars having valve problems. Now, this isn't something that's common at all, or even really an issue on the LS3. This is more kind of bespoke to the LS7. So as great as an engine as that LS7 is, it's got a common, very critical flaw of the valves. And I've also heard that these engines are more prone to burning oil than an LS2 or an LS3, so that's something to watch for as well. That may just be more to the fact that the people that own these cars track them more often, they're seen at higher RPMs, so that could be something that's playing into it. But at the same time, that isn't just something that I really wanted to be dealing with and having as a fear in the back of my head on my $30,000+ Corvette. The LS3s also, due to the smaller displacement and the thicker cylinder walls, are more boost happy and boost friendly. So you can buy a, whether it's a base model or Grand Sport, whatever, C6 Corvette with the LS3, and you could potentially make more horsepower on that stock block than you would be able to on an LS7. Now, one of the areas where the LS7 shines to me, and I've got a friend who's got a C6 Z06 Corvette, is the ability to just make insane horsepower all motor. No boost, no nitrous, nothing like that. It is not uncommon at all for a heads cam LS7 to be able to make over 600 wheel horsepower. And the feeling of that with a car where no complications from boosting it or no complications from nitrous or anything like that, it's insane that you can have an all-motor car make 600 wheel horsepower. It's awesome, and these cars can do it pretty reliably, you know, aside from the valve issue. If you're getting a good cylinder head package and, you know, you're checking your valves, doing your oil change intervals, everything like that, it's pretty bulletproof. So that's awesome in itself. You know, 600 all motor, that's something that you really can't do on an LS3. But you get into that point of, you know, what are you looking to do with the car? So, speaking of what are you looking to do with the car, that is another reason why I chose the Grand Sport over the Z06. I wanted a car that I could cruise with, but still enjoy on back roads spiritedly, but tracking the car wasn't as important to me. With that being said, the Grand Sport, especially with the manual, you do get the differential cooler, you do get the dry sump oiling, it's got the same brakes as the Z06, so you've got a lot of that track stuff. So the car's a plenty fine track capable car, but you're getting the softer suspension to where it's more compliant on bumpy roads or if you're driving the car for longer distances. And again, part of the whole thing for me buying a Corvette a second time around here was the removable roof aspect. I owned a C5 Z06, and that car, while it was much more raw, it was a fixed roof car also, so you couldn't remove the roof, and that was much more race car. That car was set up with solid engine mounts, solid trans mounts, solid diff mounts. The car made a lot of noise. It was very heavy clutch, very aggressive cam. So that car was not as enjoyable to street drive. It was great to drive in motorsports events like half-mile racing and to drive through spirited roads and things like that, but it wasn't a good street car. And a lot of that kind of trickles down to the C6 Z06 as well. It's still not a removable roof. You're going to be compromising in comfort. You know, you're not going to have as comfortable as a suspension. I believe the cars are more noisier because there's less sound deadening, thinner glass, things like that. So if you're looking for, you know, the best budget race car that you can buy, a C6 Z06, is probably going to get my vote. You'd be hard-pressed to find a car for $30,000 to $40,000 that is going to be able to beat that car in what it does, unless you're looking at a Lotus, but then you don't have the power, you're going for more of that lightness aspect. So it's kind of up to you with what you want there. One other thing that I did want to touch on that I'm jealous of with the Z06 is that gearing in that car. The Z06 has transmission gearing, which makes it possible to hit 62 miles an hour in first gear. So when you're doing 60 mile an hour, you know, pulls, you do it all in first gear. There's no need to shift. So those cars can have pretty fast 0 to 60 times. Whereas in my Grand Sport, you know, you're shifting into second gear and you're losing the time with that when you're doing 0 to 60 runs. So something to look at there. That's going to be most of the differences. You've got pretty much the lightness of the Z06 with the fixed roof coupe. You've got that they're all manual transmissions. You've got the stiffer suspension. You've got the LS7 versus the LS3. You've got the carbon fiber fenders. I think that's it. There may be some little minor nuances here and there. Again, the year is another thing. So if you're looking to get a newer car, or if you're trying to finance a car and your lender has year stipulations, you may be looking more towards a Grand Sport. But the Grand Sport essentially is the Z51 Corvette of earlier years with the wide body and brakes of a Z06. If you get the manual Grand Sport coupe, you also get dry sump oiling. But don't let somebody try to tell you it's basically a Z06, because it's not. I own a Grand Sport and it's not a Z06. You don't have an LS7, but you can still, it's an LS engine, you can still do a cam package on the car, intake, heads if you want to, and make over 500 wheel horsepower. It's very doable. It's been done before. My car is right about there, and it's plenty for the street. If you're into competitive racing, or you want to do half-mile racing or roll racing, you might be looking at a Z06 just for that lightness and a little bit more horsepower. But for what I wanted the car to do, the Grand Sport fits the bill perfectly. So drop it in the comments down below if you own either one of these cars, or if you have thoughts that you'd like to share about the Z06 or the Grand Sport. I'd like to hear them. If you want to hear a comparison of what sets the Z01 apart from the Z06 and the Grand Sport, also let us know in the comments down below. This is Mike from the Focus Garage. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and tap that bell for notifications, because we've got a ton of content coming out in the upcoming weeks here. Be sure to have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.